Hey, so in this tutorial, we're going to be creating a contact management system. It's basically just going to be a table where each row is a person. The person is going to have a name, a phone number, and an address. And in the header row, you're also going to have an add new person button. You're going to be able to edit existing people and delete people with the confirmation there. So in this tutorial, we're not going to be going over more intermediate topics such as sorting, or searching, so you're not going to be able to search for people in the table, and you're not going to be able to sort by alphabetical order or anything like that. If you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments, and we can do a video on that in the future. The other thing that we're not going to be doing in this video is validation. So what I mean by that is if you go in and you create a new person and you type in some random stuff for the phone number, it's going to accept that. And we're not going to go through and use regular expressions or anything to determine whether or not that is a valid phone number, but we can do that in another video as well. So let me know in the comments if you're interested. However, we are going to check for whether or not values are empty. So if I put this and then I click submit, we're going to make sure that these turn red. It's not right now because I have an older version of the code, but this and this would turn red because these are empty, and we're going to do that in this tutorial as well, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. What I like to do is I like to just go ahead and at the beginning of the tutorial after demonstrating, I just like to, whoops, not the right button. Open in Explorer, and I just like to go in and just delete everything so that we start from scratch together. And so go ahead and remove that. First thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a index.html file. This is where all of our HTML is going to go. And let's create a style.css file. This is where all of our styles are going to go. And then we're going to create another, it's going to be script.js. This is where all of our JavaScript is going to go, which is going to be what is the main functionality aspect of our program here. So starting with the index.html, go ahead and put your HTML skeleton up. That's what I like to call this. So you create HTML tags, then you create header tags, and then you create body tags. At the very bottom of the body, put some script tags, and we're going to put source equals, and then script.js is what we named the JavaScript file. And then up here, we're going to link to the CSS file. So we'll go ahead and say this, and then href is equal to style.css because that is what we named the file. So just a quick couple things I want to go over really quick. This is going to be pure JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. We're not going to be using any frameworks or any external libraries. However, we are going to do a couple of imports. We're going to be importing a font from Google Fonts just so it will look nicer. We're going to be importing an image just to have a background picture. And then we're also going to be using something called Font Awesome, which is just a basically a font spreadsheet service, I guess you can call it, that allows you to import fonts. And we're just going to be using that for a trash can and an edit button for the delete and edit buttons, just to make it look a little nicer. That's all. So we're going to be importing that here in the head a little bit later. So for now, let's go ahead and just write all of the HTML and get that out of the way, and then we can kind of go and start doing the CSS, and then we'll go into the JavaScript at the very last part. So starting in the body, the first thing that we're going to want to do is create a div here. Actually above this, let's create an h1 tag that just says contact management system, just so we can have something on the screen. So if I refresh, we can have this on the screen. And let's just make sure that we have everything imported. So do this really quick. Go into your script.js file and just type some stuff in here and save it. And then come back over here to your, I'm using Google Chrome, by the way. Right click in there and open up your console and click refresh. You should see whatever you put in here. If you do not see that, then your JavaScript import is not correct. So take another look at that really quick. And then we're going to do the same thing with the CSS. Let's just add a quick background color. Wow. Let's just make it red or something. If this turns red, then we know it's linked. Okay, great. So we are good to go. I just wanted to make sure that we get that out of the way in the beginning, because if it happens later, I don't want you guys searching all over the place to try to figure out where you went wrong. So if you are good to go, let's continue. So inside of this div, we're going to be putting the table header and a reference to what we're going to be injecting the table body into with JavaScript. So starting here, let's give this class CMS table container. CMS is going to stand for Contact Management System. It's just an easy way to keep track of what we're doing here. We're going to want another div inside of the container, and it's going to be a row, and it's going to be of class CMS table row. Now this is just going to be our header. We're going to be hard coding the header because the header will never change. It'll always be name, phone number, address, and the add button. However, the rows themselves are always going to be dynamic, so we're going to be loading those with JavaScript, so we're not going to put that in HTML. I'll show you how we're going to do that in just a moment. So each of the row items we're going to put in here is also going to be a div. Now each one of these is also going to get a couple of classes. The first one is CMS table column, and that's going to, oops, got to put that inside of a class. There we go. CMS table column. So each one of these is going to have the CMS table column class, and it's just going to represent basically a cell, and it belongs to the column class. This is going to be the name, so we're going to say CMS name, and we're also going to give it the CMS header class to just make sure that we know in JavaScript that this is a header and not a row in the body. Okay, so let's go and give this the same thing, CMS table column, but this is going to be CMS phone, and it's also going to have the CMS header class. And this is going to say phone, and then let's do the same thing here, CMS table column, CMS address, and also CMS header. And then here we will put address. Now here is the last one that we're going to do. It's going to be the add button. So let's go ahead and give it the CMS table column class along with the CMS header class. But instead of giving it, well, now let's go ahead and give it a class as well. Say CMS add entry column. It's just a good practice to do that in case you do want to use a class. You might as well just go ahead and add it. There's no point not to. Then we're going to use an ID. It's going to be CMS add new entry. Now, just to explain why I use a little bit different of a syntax for IDs here, let me make this a little bigger. For classes, I like to use the standard CSS sort of syntax, and then for IDs, I like to use the sort of JavaScript camel case syntax, because oftentimes you're going to be using classes more often in CSS and IDs more often in JavaScript. It's just a personal preference. You can do it however you like, but this is how I do it. So in here, the text is going to be a plus button, and that's going to be our sort of symbol to represent add new. Then underneath this div that we just created, this parent div here, but still inside the table container, we're going to create a span, and we're going to give it a class. You know what? This is just going to have an ID because we're going to be adding classes to it dynamically. Table body. Okay, so this is what we're going to be grabbing in JavaScript in order to insert the rows into dynamically. So this is going to stay empty. Now we're almost done here. What we're going to be doing is, if you remember when I showed the demo in the beginning, you saw a little pop-up modal with a form in it that you can use to edit and create new people. There was also a giant backdrop. So when I opened up the modal, it sort of blurred out the background. We're going to be creating those elements here, but by default, we're going to make them hidden. And then when you click the plus button or you click the edit button, etc., we're going to make them visible. So starting off, we're going to create the backdrop, and that is just going to be a div. And we're going to give it a class called disable modal. Anything with the disable modal class is just going to make the visibility be none, basically. And you'll see that when we do the CSS portion. So ID backdrop, that is all we're going to do for that. And then the pop-up modal form is going to be in here. We're going to give this a class of disable modal as well. And this is going to have an ID of new person modal. Okay. Now in here, we just have to put the inputs, so that the user has something to type text into, along with labels for the inputs so they know which input which information they're supposed to be putting in that input. So I just like to put a little header at the top that just says like add new person. And then we can start putting in the inputs. I start with the label, and then in here we're going to start with the name of the person, and then we're going to put an input. Type is going to be text, and then we're going to do an ID of, let's say, new person name. That's intuitive enough. Now let's just take this, and for the label, there's actually a property called for. And it's literally what is the label for, and in this case it's for the new person name. And what this does is it allows the label to have a sort of connection to that input. And so if you were to click the label, the actual text that says name, it's going to highlight that input. Let me see if I can demonstrate that now. So if I click on name here, you see how it highlights the input. If I take this off and save it and refresh, when I click the name, nothing happens, it's just text, okay? So let's put that back. That's why I like to do that. Now we're going to be creating 3 of these. Put a space between each one just so it's easier to see. Okay, so this is going to be new person phone, and the text for the label is phone, and we just changed the ID here as well. And then this is the address. Do the same here. And here. And then the last 2 things inside of this are buttons, so we'll just go ahead and create the 2 button tags. Now let me explain something really quick. The first one is going to say cancel. Oops. And the second one is going to say submit. However, we're going to be using float right in CSS, so it's actually going to be backwards in order. So it's when you're reading from left to right, it's actually going to be submit and then cancel. So just keep that in mind, okay? So let's go ahead and give IDs to these. New person cancel button for the cancel button, and then ID of new person submit btn for the submit button. And we are officially done with the HTML portion of this tutorial. So we are about to move over to the CSS portion of this tutorial. However, let's go ahead and refresh and see what we've got. Absolutely beautiful. I think we can just call it a day. We're done. This tutorial's over. Just kidding. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by grabbing the image that we're going to be using. This is the image that we're going to be using for the background, and I'm going to put a link to that in the description of this video so that you guys don't have to go searching for it. You can also use whatever image you'd like, but just click free download here and then show in Finder. And then what I like to do is I just rename it BG because it's really easy to reference in code that way. And then drag it into the same exact location that your index.html file is in. And then in your CSS file, under the body, let's go ahead and bring this back to focus. You can put background, image, then you put URL and some parentheses, and then in quotations you put the location of the background image, which in our case is bg.jpg. That is the location, so when we refresh, it is the background. Now there's a couple of things that we have to do to make the background image look the way we want it to, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go all the way through the CSS file here, and I'm going to be explaining what I'm doing and why I'm doing it as I do it. And I just need you to listen and kind of follow along and also try to understand what I'm saying. And if you don't understand what I'm saying at any point, let me know in the comments, and I am known to go in and speak to every single person that asks questions. So let's get started here. The color is going to be white. That means the font of everything in the body is going to be white unless we overwrite it later on. The background size. So this is where we're going to start doing a couple things to the background image. We're going to say cover. This is going to make sure that the background image covers the entire background and it doesn't just leave like empty spots on the side or on the bottom. The background repeat is going to be no repeat because we don't want it to be tiled. We just want one solid background. Background position takes an X and a Y value, but we're just going to say center, center. So both centered X and Y. Then the overflow X for the body is going to be set to hidden. And the reason why we're doing this is because we don't want the users to scroll horizontally. It's just in an app like this, we only want them to scroll up and down, and we're just going to make the table really wide so that they don't have to scroll from side to side. The padding for the body is going to be 0. We're going to do the same thing with the margin. And we're going to do background. Actually, let's go ahead and grab our Google font really quick. So just go to Google Fonts. Here we're going to be using a font called Open Sans. It's right here. So all you do is you type in Open Sans up here. You'll see it here. Don't mistake it for condensed. You can use whatever font you want, but this is what I recommend for the tutorial. Click the plus button. You'll see this thing pop up down here in the corner. Pull that up. Over here, you'll see at import. This allows you to use a CSS import instead of the standard HTML import. I prefer to do it here. Then at the very top of your CSS file, paste that up here. Then this part right here is what you use to actually reference that font and assign it. So in here, we're gonna paste that. And now we get, if we refresh, all the fonts are using that particular font. Okay, so that is for the body. Let's go ahead and move to the H1. In typography, they typically say that the header should have a different font than everything else in the body. It's just something that is aesthetically pleasing to most people. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say font family, and we're gonna give it the standard sans serif font that comes with CSS. So if we refresh over here, you can see that now this font is slightly different than the rest of the fonts. And that's usually what people say you should do. So text align center. So we want the header to be in the center. The margin top, we're going to set to 20 pixels, and that's going to put a little bit of space between the top of the header and the top of the window so that it's not crowded and gives it a little bit of room to breathe. Then we're going to say font size. Oops, wow. Font size is going to be 48 pixels, so we can make it nice and huge so you know exactly what it is you're looking at. Then we are going to do a text shadow. And that's going to be 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 5 pixels black. Now when we refresh, you get this sort of nice looking header here. All right, let's go ahead and do the CMS table container, which we already created that div in here. It's right here. That is going to be font size of 20 pixels. And we're going to do a margin top of 20 pixels. Again, just to give it a little bit of room to breathe. The width is going to be 80%. Let's see. The margin is going to be set to auto. There we go. And the actually, let's set the margin top to 35. Sorry. Let's just give it a nice good margin. And I think that's going to be it for this. So let's move on to the next element here. CMS table row. Now I don't think we have any of these yet. Yeah, because we're using CMS header for the header. CMS table row is going to be all of the rows that we're injecting into this using JavaScript. So we don't have this yet. So let's just go ahead and write the CSS for it. We're going to be using something called CSS Flexbox. It's built into CSS, so you don't, it's not a framework or anything like that outside of CSS. And you just type in display flex, and that is going to be what we're using to kind of give it that nice table grid sort of layout that we're going to be that you saw in the beginning. Then we're going to say CMS table column. So this is going to apply to each of the cells. The background color, okay, is going to be RGBA. Now, the way that RGBA works is you put in a red value, a green value, and a blue value, and it produces a color. And then the fourth value is the alpha, which is the opacity. 0 is completely opaque, meaning that it's completely invisible. And the value 1 is completely 100% visible. So everything in between that, you can put 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and get the level of opacity that you want. As for the color that I chose here, all I did was I took this image and I put it in Photoshop, and I grabbed a color off of one of these clouds here, and I just used that for the background color that we're going to be using here in the table, just because I figured that would look good, and it ended up looking pretty decent. So we're going to do that. 236, comma, 54, comma, 68, comma, 0.8. And that is what we're going to use as the background color for the cells. Then we're going to put a margin of 2 pixels. We are going to put a padding of 15 pixels. We're going to do white space, no wrap. And I'm going to explain these last three in just a second. White space, no wrap, overflow hidden, and text overflow ellipsis. Okay, so what does this do? So the white space, no wrap states that anything inside of the cell, if it were default, if we didn't put that, what would happen is if the text was too long to fit inside of that cell, it would wrap to the next line. And it would make the cell taller in order for the stuff to fit inside of it. See, we don't want that because we want all of the rows to be the exact same height because it just looks better that way. So we don't want it to wrap down to the next line. So it does that, but now that we did that, it can break out of the cell. And we don't want that, so we put overflow hidden. So now whenever the text starts to overflow out of the cell, it just hides. However, even that can be confusing to the user that's using the app because you may not know that text is overflowing. For instance, the word apple, A-P-P, app. Maybe the L and the E is off and you think the word is app, but it's really apple because the L and the E is hidden. Well, text overflow with ellipsis, what that does is if it's overflowing, it puts 3 little dots there just to let the user know that, hey, there's more text here, you just can't see it right now. Okay, so CMS name. Flex basis 20%. That is going to be basically what percentage of the row, what percentage of the width of the row should this cell take up? And in our case, we want 20% for the name. And we also want 20% for the phone, so they will be the same width. However, CMS address, addresses tend to be a bit bigger than names and phone numbers, so we want it to be, we're going to say flex grow 2, which means it's going to take up 2 columns worth of room, and we want each column to be 20%. So it's going to be about twice as big as or exactly twice as big as the phone and the name cells. All right. Then now let's target that header that we created earlier in the HTML file. The header, we're going to do the same background color as the normal stuff, but we are going to take the opacity off completely. So just put 1 so that it is accentuated slightly so you can tell that it's a header. And then we're going to take the font weight and make it bolder so that, again, the header tends to look a little bit different, a little bit more solid than the rest of the table. Okay, CMS edit, comma, CMS delete. The comma there just means whatever's in between these 2 brackets, do it to both of these classes. It's just shorthand for writing everything twice. Flex basis, we're going to do 5% because it's going to be really small. See, the edit button and the delete button, what's so convenient about using icons is it actually reduces the amount of width that you need. So instead of saying delete, D-E-L-E-T-E, you just get a trash can and it frees up a lot of space. So we're just going to use 5%. And the text align is going to be centered for the icons because they're going to be more like buttons, kind of. And the cursor is going to be pointer so that when the user hovers over these items, instead of just it being the standard arrow, you're going to get a hand with a little finger, so it tells the user that you can actually click on this thing. I do that with buttons as well, so you'll see when we add the button class in just a minute. CMS add entry column. So this is going to be the add button. We're going to take the width flex basis, 5%. It's going to be the same width as the other stuff. The text align is also going to be center. I'm starting to think, you know what, we can actually just add this with another comma. Let's just do that because, again, There's no point in copying and pasting that twice. There's really no reason to. So now we're going to go ahead and reference the new person modal. Okay, that is going to be a display block. Come on. Margin bottom 15 pixels. The padding is going to be 10 pixels, which, if you don't know what padding is, it's just the space between the content inside of the container and the container itself. So a bigger padding means there's going to be more space in between the content and the actual edge of whatever's containing it. So we have the padding of 10 pixels. Border radius is going to allow us to add a bevel to the corner of the container or whatever we're referencing here. So in this case, we're going to give it a 3 pixel border radius, which is just going to give it like a slight bevel, so it's not sharp corners. The width is going to be 100%. No, it's not. It's going to be, I'm sorry. Let's do z-index. So I'm going to explain z-index in just a moment, okay? And the top is going to be 50 pixels. We're going to be using absolute position. So let's go ahead and do that. I realized I was writing some of the wrong CSS here, so just bear with me really quick. The position is going to be absolute. And what that means is that the position is literally absolute. So whatever position you give it, it's going to be in that location and it will never move. None of the other elements on the document will affect it in any way. So let's take this display block off and let's take off the margin bottom. Let's just take those two off, okay? Now we're going to give this a hard-coded width of 500 pixels. So it's going to be 500 pixels wide. Now, here's a little trick that we may or may not need to do in this case, but we're going to do it anyway just so you can learn it. Since it's absolute position, usually margin 0 or margin auto isn't going to work. I can try it really quick just to see if it does work. Margin auto, let's see what happens. In that case, yeah, see, it does not work because everything, this form is still on the left side of the screen. We want it in the center because it's going to look better that way. The problem is, since it's absolutely positioned, you can't use margin auto. You have to manually calculate the position on the side of the screen. So in order to do that, we're going to use something built into CSS called calc. And by the way, the margin here needs to be, we're just going to be targeting the left side of the margin for this. We're going to start with 50%. Now, whoops. If we were to put the margin left to be 50%, then imagine the modal is a perfect square. Now follow my mouse over here and I'll show you. So in the center of the screen, that is 50%. Margin left means that the left side of that square modal would be at the center of the screen, which means that the modal would be mostly on this side of the screen, the right side here. We don't want that. We want the center of the modal to be at the center of the screen. So in order to do that, all we're going to do is take that 50% and subtract half of the modal's width from it, and we will get exactly what we want. So we know that the modal's width is 500 pixels, and half of that has to be 250 pixels. So 50% minus 250 pixels is what we want the margin left to be. And when we refresh, it is in fact in the middle of the screen. Cool. I think that's everything that we want for here. Let me explain the z-index really quick. So dimensions go as follows. We have the x-axis, which is left to right. We have the y-axis, which is up and down. And we also have a third axis, which is depth. It's the z-axis, and it's forward and backwards. The z-index is basically a way to say, hey, in what order is it stacked on top of each other? So what do I mean by that? By default, I believe it's 0, or it might be 1. If you have something with a z-index of 1, but then you put something on top of it with a z-index of, say, 50, well, it's going to appear to the user on top of that z-index of 1 because it has a higher z-index. If you were to give it a z-index of negative 50, it would appear below. So what we're doing here is we want that modal to appear on the very top. We want it to appear on the very, very top. We want the backdrop that we created a minute ago to appear under the modal, but on top of everything else in the document. So we're actually going to be giving that a z-index of 50. You can really use any numbers. These are just the numbers that I'm picking, as long as they're bigger or smaller than the other ones. I hope that's making sense, okay? Let's go ahead and add the background color really quick. Ooh, that's not what I wanted. The background color for the modal itself is going to be RGB. So we're not going to use an alpha for this because we just want it to be a solid color. 168, 44, 44. 168, 44, 44. So it's going to be this sort of red color. All right, I think that's everything that we need for the new person modal. Let's go ahead and target the inputs inside of it. So in order to do that, we just put input after the ID name here. Make sure we spelled it right. Yep. So this is what we're going to give a display of block. We're going to give the margin bottom of 15 pixels. So it gives a display block. Each of the inputs and the labels are going to be on their own line. And the margin bottom 15 pixels means that there's going to be 15 pixels of space between the bottom of the input and the next item in the document below it. Then we're going to say padding of 10 pixels to give a little bit of space on the inside of the inputs where the text is. And the border radius here is going to be 3 pixels for the inputs because I think that that looks a little bit better for inputs if they don't have sharp corners. In fact, let's go back up here really quick to the new person modal and set this to be 5 pixels instead of 3. Okay, back into the input section, we're going to give a width of 100%. So it's going to take up 100% of the modal width, but if you remember, we added 10 pixels of padding. So it's going to be, you know, almost the full width. All right. Now let's go ahead and add a class that we don't have quite yet. It's going to be called input error. This is going to be what I was talking about earlier, how the inputs are going to turn red if they're empty when you try to submit it. We're just going to put a background color of red. So anything that has this class is going to have a background color of red. Excuse me. All right, backdrop. Let's go ahead and target the backdrop. We're getting close to the end of the CSS file here. All right, so the backdrop needs to take up the full height and full width of the screen. So width, 100%. Height, you guessed it, 100%. The position is going to be fixed so that if we're scrolling up and down, the backdrop stays still and is always covering the full background. The background color, we're going to make this black, but we're going to do RGBA because we want it to be slightly opaque. And the reason why, let's do, I don't know, 0.8. The reason why we want the backdrop to be slightly opaque is because we want the user to know that they're still on the same page. We don't want to confuse them and make them think that they've navigated away in order to get to this modal, because then they may click the back button instead of cancel. And if they click the back button instead of cancel, it's going to take them away from the web page. We don't want that. So let's just be nice to the user and do that. Z-index of 50, like I was talking about earlier, so that it sits below the modal but above the standard content on the screen. Top of 0 and a left of 0 means that the top left corner is going to be anchored to the top left corner of the screen. All right, next thing, new person submit btn. Make sure I spelled that right. Yep. All we're doing here is we're just going to add a background color. RGB because we don't want any opacity. We're going to do 47, 95, 151. And then we also want to target the new person cancel btn. And as you can see here, the submit button is going to be like a blue. We want the cancel button to be sort of a red because, you know, like cancel red. I don't know, it just makes sense to me. 151, 47, 47. And as you can see there, that would be the color of the button there. So now instead of going through and creating a button class, since those are the only two actual button elements on the document that we created, let's just use the button selector here. So we're going to give it a padding of 15 pixels, again, just to make the button a little bit less squishing down on the text. Border radius, we'll give it 5 pixels. The color, we already specified at the top that it's going to be white. Let's do no border whatsoever on these buttons. Let's do float right, and I was talking about that earlier. The margin is going to be 5 pixels so that there's space between the buttons and the form and all of that. And finally, the cursor, as I was saying earlier, should be pointer. It just looks better. I wish more people would do that. Button, but this time put colon hover. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that anything inside of these brackets will happen to the buttons if you're hovering over them. And all we're going to do here is decrease the padding slightly to 13 pixels, just so that the user has some sort of visual cue that they are hovering over the button and it's ready to be clicked. It's just going to make the button just a tad bit smaller. That's all it's doing. All right, disable modal, that class that we created earlier. All we're going to do here is set the visibility to hidden. And we are going to set the enable modal class to be visibility visible. Okay. The very final thing we're going to do in CSS, if you remember, we're going to be getting some stuff from Font Awesome. Font Awesome uses the icon element, which is just an eye. And you will see what I mean by that a little bit later. So the selector here would just be an eye. And we're going to do pointer events none. And the reason why we're doing pointer events none is because the icon itself is going to be inside of a cell. And we want to detect the click whenever the user clicks anywhere in that cell, not the icon itself. Okay. So when we do this, this tells the browser to ignore any events that happens with the user's mouse on that element. So we are officially done with the CSS portion of this. If we refresh, as you can see, it looks okay. The font size is a bit big for this, so let's go back to the header. Let's see what, I think we must have missed something because I thought we changed that. So, or table container font size 35? Seems a bit big, doesn't it? Let's try font size 20. How's that? Oh, I see what happened. That's supposed to be 20, and this is supposed to be 35. So at the top here, change your font size to 20 pixels for the container and your margin top to 35 pixels for the container, and then refresh, and that is way better. Wow. Okay, so that is all for the CSS and the HTML portion. We are going to be doing the JavaScript portion now. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into the JavaScript. So what we're going to be using is JavaScript's local storage in order to store the information, the rows of each person on the user's browser. Local storage is really convenient. It's a key value pair system where the key is whatever you want to call it. In our case, we're going to be using a CMS table. So let's go ahead and create that const table key is equal to CMS table. And this way we can just use the table key variable whenever we want to reference the key. That way it's pretty much impossible to make a typo with your key. And then that would cause issues later on if you do that by accident. However, since we are doing this, while we are developing, we're going to want a little button in the bottom right corner that allows you to clear the local storage in the case that you mess something up. You can easily just click clear local storage, and then you don't have to go through this nightmare of trying to figure out how to clear your local storage, especially if you're new to this. So let's go ahead and this is going to be temporary. We're going to delete this button. Put a button, clear local storage. We're going to give an ID of clear BTN. And I'm going to put the style in line here because I want to, since we are going to be deleting this button, I just want to be able to delete it all in one spot instead of having to go to the CSS file and delete it there too. So the position is absolute. The right is going to be 0 pixels, and the bottom is going to be 0 pixels. Let's save that, make sure it appears. Yep, it's right there in the bottom right corner. It has our BTN classes, which is pretty cool. So you can see what that's going to look like. Okay, let's go ahead and grab a reference to that in our JavaScript here. Let clear BTN equal document.getElementById, and then in parentheses here, put the ID, and then we're going to say clear BTN dot add event listener and that's going to be of a type click. So we're going to listen for clicks on this button, and if a click happens, we're going to do whatever is in between these two braces here. So the second argument of the add event listener function is a function, and we're going to put inside of here local storage dot remove item table key. But we got to make sure that we put all of this after we define table key. We might not have to. Scope is a little bit weird in JavaScript, but let's just do it like that, okay? So I'm going to create a variable that we're going to use called CMS table, and that is going to be our table in JavaScript object notation form, and we'll get to that in a minute, just so you can kind of visualize what that looks like, and also so we can have something to work with. I'm going to create a demo version of the CMS table. Okay, so go ahead and create this variable. The keys for each item in this JSON object is actually going to be the name itself. So here, just put Bobby Jones as the name, and that's going to contain an object with phone. Put any phone number you want in there. And then it's going to also have address. And put, like, again, just put whatever address you want in there. That works. And then just, I'm going to create one more just so we can have two entries, so you can kind of see what that looks like. Just change the name. Change like a digit, a couple digits here. And then just make this a little different so that it's not identical. Okay, so that's basically what our CMS table is going to look like. Now let's go ahead and get into what we're going to be doing in order to make all of this work, okay? This is the fun part, right? So to put this plainly, we're going to be putting probably 80% of the JavaScript code inside of a single function, and that function is going to be called refresh DOM table. And the reason why we're going to do that is because every time you add a new user, or you delete a user or edit a user, you're going to want to refresh the table so that when you say you add a new user, the table refreshes and adds that new row the way you would expect. In order to do that, all of the code that grabs all the IDs and the classes and all of the add event listeners and the creation of the elements and the rows, all of that has to happen every single time you create a new row or you edit a user, etc., in order for the table to refresh. So that is why 80% of the code is going to be within this single function. Now, we're going to go ahead and create it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Let CMS table keys is going to be equal to object.keys, and I'll explain what this does in a second. CMS table, let's see, as the argument. So what this is doing is we're creating an array. What object.keys does is whatever object you give it, it creates an array of the keys of that. So in our case, if we gave it CMS table demo instead of CMS table, it would produce an array with George Romero and Bobby Jones as the items. So it would produce this. All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and grab a reference to the table body, and we're going to delete the current table body, and we're going to create our own table body. So why are we doing that? Well, let's say you have 10 rows and you create a new row. Well, when we refresh the table, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and delete all of the rows so that the rows in the DOM are actually empty. And then we're going to one by one insert the rows back in there. So let's go ahead and say old table body equals document dot get element by ID. The element ID that we give it is table body, literally. And then we're going to say we also need to get the table container. So let's go ahead and grab the table container. Let table container equal document dot get element by ID. And I think it's called CMS table container. Let's just check and make sure. Let's just give it an ID really quick. CMS table container. There we go. So just make sure you go into your index.html file really quick and add the ID CMS table container, save that, and then come back over to your JavaScript file and add that in here. So now we have a reference to that. Now we can say table container dot remove child, and then in here we're going to put table or old table body. Okay. Now we're going to create a new table body. So we're going to say let new table body equal document.createElement. And if you remember, that is, if we go to the index.html file, the table body is a span with the ID of table body, and that's all it is. So let's say create element, and then inside of here we're going to put span so that it's creating a span element. And then we're going to say new table body.id is equal to, you guessed it, table body. Cool. So now we're going to go through after so what we just did was we deleted the table body and all of the rows inside of it. We created a new table body, and now we have to go through and add all the rows to it. So in order to do that, we're going to have a giant for loop. So go ahead and put this in there. So we're going to say let I equal 0. I is less than CMS table keys.length, because we're going to be using the keys, which are actually the names, because if you remember, each key is the name of the person. And then we're going to iterate. So inside of here, we're going to say let current row equal document.createElement. We're going to create a div. Then we're going to say let current name column, again, is going to be a div. Then we're going to say let current phone column equals document.createElement. That is also a div. And then let's see here. We're going to do the same thing. Let current address column equal, it would be great if I could spell, document.createElement. That is going to be a div as well. Cool. So then we are going to have the actual edit button. Sorry. Let current edit btn equal document.createElement, and that's going to be encapsulated within a div. And let current delete btn is also equal to document.createElement, not create attribute, create element. That is a div. All right, so I think we want to go ahead now and start assigning the class names. So we've created divs for each one of these. We've created a row div, a name, a phone, and an address column div, edit button, and a delete button div. Let me spell delete correctly. That'd be great. Now let's start giving them the proper class names. Current row dot class name is equal to, and we're going to say CMS table row. That is going to be the class that we give that. Then current name column dot class name is going to be equal to, and this we're going to give this two classes, CMS table column, and also CMS name. All right, then we're going to say current phone column dot class name is equal to CMS table column CMS phone. Then we're going to do current address column dot class name is equal to, you've probably guessed it by now, CMS table column CMS address. Then we want to do the edit button and the delete button. So current edit button dot class name is going to be equal to CMS table column along with CMS edit, and then the current delete button dot class name is going to be equal to, these are pretty predictable, I know. This is just code that you have to type. It can be a pain, but at least you don't have to think that hard when you do it. Then we're going to do the inner HTML, which is going to be the, I'll give you a visual here. So the inner HTML is the HTML within the tags. So if we're creating a div, most of the time we are, the inner HTML in this case is just the word address. So that is that. So we're going to start with current name column dot inner HTML, and we are going to set that to be, actually it's not going to be that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say CMS table keys I, and the reason why we're doing that is because I is the current number we're on when we're iterating through, and CMS table keys is all of the names. If you remember that it's this array here, so 0 would be Bobby Jones and 1 would be George Romero. So we're going through and we're setting, if we were using the CMS table demo right now and we were on 0, then we are setting current name column dot inner HTML equal to Bobby Jones. Okay. Then we want to do the current phone column dot inner HTML equal. Try to do this one really quick on your own. Pause this. I'm going to go ahead and do it now. If you couldn't figure it out, here we are. CMS table. Then we're going to use the key, which in our case is CMS table keys I, because we're accessing this dictionary essentially. And then we know that the keys are the names, so CMS table keys I is the name we're on. So we access Bobby Jones of CMS table demo, and then we're looking for the phone, so we say dot phone. And then we're going to do the same thing with the address. So if you couldn't get it last time, try pausing it now and trying it here with the address, okay? Okay, so now we have those. Let's go ahead and get the, let's go ahead and get Font Awesome really quick, since we're gonna do the inner HTML for the edit and delete buttons right now. Let's go ahead and get Font Awesome. So I'm gonna put this link in the description below. All you're gonna do is go to this link, and you're gonna go to this thing right here, and you're gonna copy the entire thing, and you're gonna put it in the head underneath the style sheet of your HTML document, okay? Save that. Now you have the Font Awesome style sheet imported into your document. Now we just have to get the fonts we're going to use. So up here in the search bar, type in trash. Find the one you want. In our case, I'm going to just pick this one. Then up here, you see this right here. This is the HTML you're going to use. That's it. You just copy it. You click it. It copies it for you. And then we are going to use that for the delete button. So let's go ahead and add the delete button really quick. Current delete button dot inner HTML is going to be equal to that. Okay. If that makes sense, great. If not, send me a comment and I will help you out. Okay. But it's pretty simple. I think you got it. So now we're going to do edit. We're going to grab edit here. Cool. Copy that. And then we're going to do the same thing with edit. Dot inner HTML is equal to that. So that is all we're going to do with Font Awesome. We can officially close those tabs. But like I said, I'm going to put that in the description for you guys. Cool. So what is next? We have let's go ahead and start putting the stuff into the document. So we've created the elements, but we haven't yet put them into the document object model. So even though we've created the elements, it's not going to show up in our browser yet. So let's say current row dot append child the current name column, and then we're going to do this a couple of times, once for each of the, I think that might be good. So just current name column, current phone column, current address column, current delete, current edit button, current delete button, and the very last thing. So now what we did was we took all of the rows, the items that we just created here, and we pushed them into our current row. Now we need to push the actual row into the table body. So now we're going to say table body is probably what, new table body, that's what we're calling it. New table body dot append child current row. So now we have officially created the table body. Now we're outside of the for loop. We've created the table body. Now we have to set a couple of sort of click events. And we're also going to be, we forgot a couple of click events and items as well that we're going to go ahead and get, like this add button. And we're also going to set the, let's start with a function that we're going to be using to enable and disable the modal. If you remember, we have a modal, you just can't see it right now. And the modal is, we want it to appear and disappear when you click on certain buttons. We want it to appear when you click on the new user button, and we want it to appear when you click on the edit button. But you also want it to disappear when you submit the form, and you also want it to disappear if you click cancel. So we're going to create one function that does both for you. So we're going to say let enable disable new user modal, and we're going to create this function here, and it's going to take a parameter that we're going to just call option, and it's just going to be a string that's either going to be enable or disable, and we can call this and it will handle that for us. Let new person name, let's go ahead and grab the document.get element by ID. This is going to be the let me show you what this is going to be really quick. If you go to the index.html file, you can see it's just this input right here. So we're grabbing the new person name input, and then we're going to do the same thing with the other two inputs. We have new person phone equals document.get element by ID, and then in here it's new person phone, and then the address okay. Go ahead and by default we're going to set those values equal to an empty string. So every time you open the modal, you want the values of the inputs to be completely blank. You don't want there to be stuff in them already, unless you're clicking edit, which we're going to later go through and put in that information in just a second. So new person name dot value, no, not node value, just value, is equal to an empty string. New person phone dot value is equal to an empty string. New person address dot value is equal to an empty string. And then we're going to let new person modal, so this is the actual modal itself, we're going to say document.get element by ID, and we called that literally new person modal. Now I have a typo here. Let's fix that really quick. I didn't put an equal sign, and gotta close it off with a quote. Cool. So what we're gonna do with that is let's also grab the backdrop. We're just gonna make these visible. So let backdrop equal document.get element by ID, and we called that ID backdrop. Now all we're gonna do is give both of those classes the actually we're gonna do something a little interesting. So new person modal dot class name So in JavaScript, there's 3 ways to create strings with quotes. There is the single quotes, like you see here. There is the double quotes, like you see here. And then there's also these tick marks. And if you use these tick marks, you can actually put variables in JavaScript inside of this without having to concatenate the string using the plus sign. So in our case, if you remember, the option is going to either just be enable or disable. If we go to our CSS here, we have 2 classes. We have enable modal and disable modal. Well, if you see, disable and enable are both the options that we're going to be using as part of this function. So it would be really convenient to utilize that so we don't have to write code a bunch of times. So option. Let me explain what I did. Sorry. So in order to put JavaScript inside of here, you put a $sign and then 2 curly braces. And then you can put any JavaScript inside here. You can put 2 + 2 and it will evaluate to 4. You can put variables. JavaScript can go inside of here. In our case, we're going to put the variable option. And then you can continue the string on from there. So if we say this -modal and we put disable here, you're literally going to get disable modal. So that's just a convenient way for us to go ahead and shorthand this code. Person, we're going to say backdrop. We're going to do the same thing for backdrop. All right, cool. So that is our enable disable modal function. Now let's go ahead and get reference to the add new entry btn. Excuse me. Okay, add new entry btn is document.getElementById. Lots of this get element by ID stuff I know, but once you get past all this boilerplate code, it gets a lot funner because you can start adding your own features in a lot less code. You just get all of this DOM stuff out of the way, and it's so much funner after that. CMS add new entry btn. No, I think it's just, let's see, what did I call it really quick? Yep, CMS add new entry. So we just leave it like that. And then we're going to get edit btns is equal to document.getElements. This is different by class name. Okay, so what does that mean? We're going to get all of the elements with the class name CMS edit. And it's going to, when we do that, it's going to return an array with all of the elements in it with the class CMS edit. So edit btns right now is actually an array. Let delete buttons equal the same thing, document.getElements by class name, CMS delete. Then we want to get the a reference to the new user submit button and cancel button, which are there whether or not it's visible. So keep that in mind. The modal is there in the document. You can grab the items and the elements from it in JavaScript whether it's visible or not. So let new, not capital, new person submit btn is going to be document.getElementById. New person submit btn is the ID name, and then let's get let new person cancel btn equals document.getElementById, and that is new person cancel btn. Cool. So now we have both the submit and the cancel button. Now we can start adding the click functions for the buttons. This one is, let's go ahead and do the submit button first. New person submit button dot add event listener. Again, you put the type of event as the first argument, which in our case is click, and that's a string, by the way. And you put a comma for the second parameter. It's going to be a function. So we're going to do this function when you click on the submit button. And in our case, we're going to do a lot of stuff. So let's put some empty variables at the top. Let new person name, let new person phone. These are going to be our placeholder variables for these. New person address. Okay. And then let's go ahead and set those. Let's just set them. Document.get element by ID, new person name. I did something wrong again. I forgot the equal sign. Okay, but we want the actual value of it. So we're going to put dot value, but then we're going to trim it. And the reason why we're trimming it, so trimming is going to take all of the white space, all of the empty spaces from the beginning and from the end, and just get rid of that. And we want to do that because we don't want any empty spaces in our value here. We want 0 empty spaces. I mean, there can be a space between the first and the last name, and it won't affect that. It's just going to take the space off the beginning and the end. And we're actually going to do that for all 3 of these. So I'm just going to copy and paste and just change the simple little thing there. Whoa. Address. Okay, now that we have those, we're going to do some checks here. So if new person name, no, we want new person name, is equal to an empty string, then remember what I was saying earlier. If something is equal to an empty string, then we're going to give it a class name, new person class name. This is not, I'm sorry, new person name dot class name is equal to, we called it input error. And if we go, let's just verify that really quick. Yep, input error. That's the class name we're going to give the input if it's empty. So it will turn red if the value of that input is an empty string. And another great thing about using trim is that sometimes it can return that, and we don't want to check for every single possible combination of empty strings. So that is the trim will just make sure that if it is an empty string, it will always equal that. Else, the new person name dot class name is going to be equal to an empty string. In other words, no class at all. And why are we doing that? Because again, you have to keep in mind that this is a refresh table function. So when we first, so say we try to submit the form, and it gives all 3 of the inputs the input error class because they're all empty. And then the user's like, you know what, screw this, clicks cancel. Well, those 3 inputs still have the input error class. So when you click on the new add new user button again, or edit user button, whatever, it will show up with red input values, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put an if else statement, and if it's not empty, we're going to give it no class. Or another way is if it turns red and then you go through and you put some letters in there and then you try to click submit again, then it's going to take that class off. So that's just a couple of reasons why we're doing it like this, okay? New person phone is equal to, and we're just going to do this for all 3 of those. In fact, again, it would be easier if we just copied and pasted this 3 times. If VS Code wanted to do the indentation properly. So just replace this with phone. Make sure you get each instance of it. Or you can type it manually if you like doing that, it's fine. Nothing wrong with it. Okay, so now that we've gotten this far, now we're going to check and make sure that all 3 are properly filled out. So this is just checking to make sure that each one individually is filled out, and then individually making each one have this input error class. Now we have to make sure that all 3 are in fact good to go before we actually start submitting the data to our local storage. So in that case, we're going to say if new person name does not equal an empty string, and new person phone does not equal an empty string, and new person address does not equal an empty string, then we can do all of this stuff, which is going to be let new person, move that out of the way, equals an empty object. So we're going to go ahead and create the empty object. Then we're going to say CMS table new person name is equal to, and it looks like we might not even use this new person. That we might not use this guy, but let's just take it a little further and find out. So phone. So by the way, really quick, the new person name is, again, we use that as the key for the dictionary here, and the CMS table is the JSON object. So the name is going to be the key for this, and then this stuff right here is going to be the value. So the phone is going to be new person phone. Since we have that now, we grabbed that from the input. If you remember right here, we have the phone number right there, and we also have the address. And we can set both of these, new person address. And so now we have the CMS table that we have up here at the top, right here. We have that updated with the new user, and now we gotta set it in local storage. So when we do local storage.setItem, the first item is the key, and the second item is the value. And in our case, oh, by the way, the value for local storage has to be a string. We can't actually put the JSON object itself just raw into local storage. We have to turn it into a string first. Luckily, JavaScript is really great for that. There's a function called json.stringify, and we want to stringify the CMS table. And after we stringify it, it goes into local storage. Then, after we save our brand new updated table, we just created a new user. It updated the CMS table. Now we wrote it to the local storage. Now the final two steps is we have to enable, disable the new user modal. In this case, we're going to put disable because what we want is when we submit the new user modal, we want the new user modal to just disappear. Then finally, we're going to say refresh DOM table. Cool. So once we create a new user, after all of that stuff done, it calls the refresh DOM table function, goes through and recreates all the stuff that we're currently creating right now. Okay, now that is the new person submit button. In fact, I think, let's go ahead and add the add new entry button so that at least we can see the modal. Add new entry btn.add event listener. This is going to be a type click again, and then it's going to be a function. And then here we're just going to say enable, disable user modal. And then here we're going to say enable. So if we refresh and we click, okay, we don't get it yet. Oh, that's because we're not calling the, we have to actually call the refresh DOM table function. Okay, what is it? Do we not have a reference to add new entry button? Quickly see what's going on here. Oh wait, there's something in the console that says 120. Interesting. Refresh DOM table. Come on. Cannot convert undefined or null to object. What am I doing wrong here? Line 22. Okay. So normally at this point, so let's just start with the demo. Sorry. Let's just start with the demo because we haven't yet created a function that's going to load our CMS table from local storage. I apologize about that hiccup there. So let's try this again. Remove child on node parameter 1 is not of type node, so that means that we hiccuped somewhere. Let's go ahead and try to old table body. And and it's because there's a typo in there. And then now we have another error. So it's good that we're knocking out all the errors now. So 46, line 46, we have another error. And the error here says cannot read Bobby Jones of undefined. That's because we're trying to reference the CMS table. So right now, let's just try to follow with me. I don't want to confuse you guys. So I'm going to return this back to being CMS table. And I'm going to just set CMS table equal to CMS table demo here in the beginning. That way we don't have to go through and change the name of all of these variables multiple times just to get this to work properly. So now we get the expected result. We haven't set the click functionality yet for the cancel button, so it's not going to go away. But now we click plus and we get this modal as we'd expect. And it's looking pretty good. So far so good. Now let's go ahead and set the cancel button click so we can watch that work. New person cancel button equals, and oh, sorry, dot add on click listener. Starting to get a little exhausted here. It's a long tutorial. All right, add event listener of type click. Then we do this, and then all we're going to do is enable disable modal, and we're going to put disable here. Refresh. Now we should be able to open the modal and then close the modal. Fantastic. It's exactly what we want. All right, what's next? Now we're going to create click functions for all of our edit buttons. So whenever we, or actually, let's get the rows to show up now. Let's try to get the rows showing up now. So why aren't the rows showing up? That's a good question. So if CMS table is equal to CMS table demo, which is this, we should be seeing some rows, right? So let's see why we're not. We're going through, we're doing that, we're referencing the table container, we're deleting the old table container, but are we ever putting the new table container back into the DOM? It looks like we're not. Table container.remove child, we're not putting the new table body back into the table container, are we? Or are we doing that at the bottom? New table body append child current row. No, we definitely are. New table body append child current row. So we are putting. Oh no, we're not putting the new table body back into the DOM. So yeah, I apologize. Let's go ahead and right here below new table body.id equals table body, we're gonna say table container.append child, and we want to put the new table body into the DOM. So this whole time we haven't had the table body in the DOM. When we refresh it, you're gonna see the rows and you're gonna be happy. So that is great. Now let's go ahead and start getting these edit buttons working. So in order to get the edit buttons working, we're gonna have to loop through that array of edit buttons that we had. If you remember, I was talking about the fact that we had an array of edit buttons. Let's go ahead and that happens right here. Let's go ahead and loop through that array of edit buttons, and for each one of those elements we have to create a click function. So we're going to do that with a loop. Okay, so go ahead and set this loop up, and then for each of the items in this array, we're going to say edit btnsi, so the element that we're currently on inside of the edit buttons, we're going to add an event listener of type click, and we're going to do all this stuff whenever we click on one of them. And by the way, inside of this little parentheses here, put that. It's going to be a parameter. It's going to automatically pass the click event as the parameter so that we can reference this click event in just a moment, which we're going to need to do in order to get the user that we clicked on. So if we click on any element edit button, we want to know which edit button we clicked on. So we're going to use this event to do that. So let name to edit equal event. Now, bear with me here. This is going to be a little weird, but I'm going to explain it, I promise. .target. So the event is the actual click event itself. It's the literal event. The target is the thing that you clicked on. Then parent element, gosh, if I could spell, is the element that this item is inside of. Then we're going to reference its children, and that is an array, and we want the very first item. And then we're going to say the inner text. So if we just walk over here to the browser window and I click edit, the parent element to this edit button is the entire row. And then the first item of this row is this, and we're grabbing this text and we're saying that is the name to edit, okay? Then we're gonna say let the actual person to edit, the actual object, we wanna grab that object, is equal to CMS table name to edit as the key. I gotta put the equal sign there. And so now we have the actual text itself, the name, and then we also have the actual person object. Now we want to say let new person name, and that's going to be the value, the input. So if we click edit, say I click edit, just pretend. We want to pre-populate the name, pre-populate the phone, and pre-populate the address so that you're editing it. It's already there. So in order to do that, we have to create references to those inputs, document.getElementById. And the ID is new person name. And we're going to do the same thing for the phone. And then we're going to do it for the address. And then we are going to pre-populate the name. So new person name dot value is going to be equal to name to edit. Oops, name to edit, since we already have the name. Then we're going to pre-populate the phone. New person phone dot value is equal to it's going to be equal to person to edit, so that actual person to edit object dot phone, and then the address, new person address dot value, is going to be pre-populated to person to edit dot address. Then we're going to enable. What we're going to do is we're going to, just like we created an enable disable function for the modal, we're going to create an enable disable function for the value of, for the input. So what do I mean by that? Let's see, if I save this right now, I should be able to at least demonstrate this. If I click edit, nope, not yet, because I have to actually make the modal visible when we click on that really quick. So in order to do that, I would just put enable disable user modal. Let's just enable it really quick, save. So when I click edit, okay, it looks like we're forgetting a couple things. I wanted to demonstrate this really quick, but I might not be able to quite yet. Bear with me. What we want to happen when we click edit, if I bring this up, we want the name to be pre-populated, the phone and the address to be pre-populated, but we do not want them to be able to edit the name, because you're editing that particular user. If the person edits the name and then submits it, it actually creates a new entry because it's a different name. So we want the name to be visible so they can see what the name is that they're editing, but we want to completely not let them be able to edit that. So in order to do that, we're just going to disable the input. So in order to do that, we're just going to create a high-level function here. Let enable disable name input equal a function. We're going to give it an option. And again, this is very similar to what we're doing with the enable disable modal function. We're going to say let new person name equal document dot get element by ID, and that's new person name, which is the input for the name. And we're going to say if option is equal to enable, then we are going to say new person name dot disabled, which is actually a attribute of the input element. We're going to set that to false. However, else if option is equal to disable, we're going to set new person name dot disabled equal to true. Okay, so now we have a function to easily call, so we don't have to write this code every time we want to do that. So let's go back down to where we are really quick. I think we're here, right? Let's just scroll down a little bit. Yes, so enable disable name input, and we're going to say disable here because we want to disable that when we click it. So we want to enable the modal at this point. Let's go ahead and enable the modal here. So this should say enable. Let's just see if we get what we would expect now. We do. So as you can see, you can click on name and you cannot edit that, but you can edit everything else. Just click cancel for now. So that is the edit buttons. Cool. Now let's go to the next step, which is actually, thank God, the final portion of the of this giant function, which is the delete buttons. So let's go ahead and set the delete buttons up. Okay, so what we're going to do is for each of the delete buttons, we're going to set the click functionality. So delete buttons I.add event listener of type click, and then the next parameter is the function. And then again, we're going to want the event so we know which delete button was clicked. And then in here, we're going to say let name to delete. It's going to be the exact same thing as this. So let's just copy and paste it, but instead of edit, we want to say delete. And then we want to create a boolean. Let me just get this out of the way. Create a boolean called let is sure, which is going to be what we're going to use to confirm whether or not the user is sure they want to delete the user. And we're going to say that is equal to window.confirm. And what you do is you just put the text that you want to appear in that box up here. And we're going to say, are you sure you want to delete space, and then we're just going to concatenate the string here, name to delete plus a question mark. So are you sure you want to delete this person, question mark. If you click OK, that returns true and sets is sure to true. If you click cancel, it becomes false. So we're going to say if is sure, go ahead and delete user from table. And we're going to put a function here, delete user from table. Let's go ahead and create that function. And we're going to actually create that function outside of this giant refresh DOM table function. So let delete user from table equal a function. And by the way, the reason why it's okay for us to create this function after this with this syntax is because we're not calling refresh DOM table until after this function is defined anyway, okay? So we want to give the username to this function. So in this case, we're going to be calling it name to delete. So we're going to pass it the name to delete. And what are we going to do with this in order to delete it? Well, we're going to say let temp table equal to an empty object. We're going to say let the CMS table keys equal object.keys CMS table. And then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the CMS table keys, and if the key that we're on in the CMS table key matches the username, then we know that we have a match, because what we don't want is we don't want people to we don't want somehow to delete something that doesn't actually exist, if that makes sense. So we just want to make sure it exists first. And then in here, we're just going to say if, oh, actually, I apologize. The reason why we're doing this is because we're going to be populating this temp table here. And we only want to populate this temp table with users that are not this username. So what we're doing is, instead of using some function to delete the item from a dictionary, which is a little bit weird in syntax in JavaScript, what we're going to do is we're just going to create a whole new temp table and populate it with each single person that is not this user. So if username does not equal the user we're currently on, then we're going to go ahead, whoops, hold on, there we go. If the username is not equal to the name that we're currently on, then we know it's safe to go ahead and add him to the temp table. So temp table, and then the CMS table keys I is going, good lord, is going to be equal to CMS table keys I. Okay, so if that confuses you, all that we're doing is we're using CMS table keys I as the key, because that's the current key we're on, and we're saying temp table, that name, is going to be equal to the original one, but only if it's not the username that we passed here. Hope that makes sense. And then after we finish this for loop, we are going to set CMS table equal to the temp table. And now the CMS table is equal to the CMS table before. It's just that now it doesn't have that user that we passed here in it anymore. So we have effectively deleted the user from the CMS table. Now we're going to go ahead and update the local storage. So local storage.set item. The table key is the first parameter, and then we're going to JSON.stringify the CMS table. There we go. Then the final thing we're going to do is just refresh the DOM table. And now we should be able to delete users. So let's go ahead and test it out. Where's my refresh button? Here it is. Okay. I have a syntax error somewhere on line 154. Which, that's what it is. Gotta uncomment that. But we still have an error. It must. I don't think that's supposed to be an error, to be honest. I'm not convinced. Let's just see if it works. Nope. Missing that after argument list. Sorry guys. Missing that after argument list 154. Oh, is it just that? No? Must be this. There we go. Okay. Cool. So now we have it working again. Let's click on delete George Romero. This says, are you sure you want to delete George Romero? If I click cancel, it does not delete him. If I do it again and click OK, it probably did delete him. However, the reason why it looks like it didn't delete him is because we still have the CMS table demo hard coded. So I apologize that I can't demonstrate that right now, but we're getting really, really close to finished here. So at the end, what we want to do is we want to create an init function. And it's going to be really short. It's going to be really small here. And it's just going to load our CMS table from local storage and get the whole thing going. So we're going to get rid of this refresh DOM table thing at the bottom here, and we're just going to call init. And then inside of here, we're going to call refresh DOM table, but we're also going to call a couple of things before that. So we're going to say if local storage.get item table key. So what that says is if local storage.get item table key exists, so if this item exists in local storage, let's set CMS table equal to json.parse. json.parse takes a string, parses it, and creates a JSON object. So since we're doing json.stringify to take a JSON object and turn it into a string and store it in local storage, this reverses that. So json.parse local storage.get item table key. So if that exists, if that table exists, if that item exists, I'm sorry, then grab it. Otherwise, CMS table is equal to CMS table demo. And since we're adding that, we can go here to the top and get rid of this nightmare. And then we want to just local storage dot set item. We just want to go ahead and set the CMS table demo into our local storage, so it just kind of ships with a demo. It's good to do that. So json.stringify CMS table. Okay, let's see what happens now. Let's see how happy we are. Click. So we are in fact getting it without the George Romero now. That's good. Let's create George Romero again and hope that we get him. We miss him, right? Okay, please work. Ta-da. So we almost have a fully working thing now. Let's make this a little bigger so we don't get the ellipsis. See, you can see the ellipsis thing that I was talking about right here. You see how it's starting to show that some stuff is overflowing, and with the addresses and stuff. So yeah, I think the very last step we want to do here is if we if we go to add new user and I click submit, we don't get the red things that we want. We want the red things. So let's figure out why that is really quick. And once we do that, we're done with this tutorial, guys. Thanks for sticking around for this. So let's see here. The reason why is probably because we might be removing that class name at some point up here. I feel like, so new person name, if I highlight this, I can see all the instances of it right here. We might be above here. We might be setting the class equal to, no, it can't be that. That's what it is. How silly. We're trying to set, so new person name dot class name. New person name here is the actual value. So how silly is that? We want to grab a reference here. Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to take the document.get element by ID, new person name. You want to just take that section and replace that variable with this. And then you want to do the same here. And then you're going to want to do the same with the phone and the address. So go ahead and do that really quick. That was a silly mistake. Okay, so I saved it. Let's refresh. We have a typo on line 100. Let's try it again. Refresh. Okay. Click add. Click submit, and we get the red things. It's saying, hey, you need to put stuff in here. So let's do another one. Test name phone 706 706 7060. Get tired of typing this stuff. Click submit, and it works. Now, if I open this up again, everything's back to the default. I think we have a finished product here, guys. We do. Fantastic. And we can delete. Yep. Now let's get rid of that delete button. So just over here in the corner, go ahead and delete the delete button, but you have to make sure that you remember to go back to your JavaScript file and delete all the references to the clear button here, or else you're gonna get errors. So let's refresh, make sure we don't get any errors. All right, we have a working contact management system. So again, there are a couple of things that we can add to this. We can add sorting, we can add searching, we can add complex validation to make sure that whatever you're typing for a phone number is actually a phone number and an address. If you guys are interested in that, let me know in the comments. I'm starting to do one tutorial a week. I didn't do a tutorial last week because I moved into a new apartment, so I've been really busy. My next serious video, I'm at the end of this video, I'm going to put a link to a video that I created called What is Programming, which is an animated video that explains the basics of how programming languages work. The new video that I'm working on now is what is object-oriented programming. So the way my schedule is going to be working is I'm going to be doing one tutorial a week and one of these types of long-form explanation, kind of high-quality animation videos per month. Might do 2 a month, but mostly 1 per month. And I'm also going to be doing other videos as well. So if you liked this tutorial and you want more, please subscribe to me. And I thank you very much for sticking around this long.